As we continue conversations with Glen Taylor, he shares memories from elementary school, wanting to be the top student in the class, and how his competitive nature may have gotten the best of him a time or two.
I was a good student. I had a brother that was a year and a half older than me and 2 grades older than me. And he would bring his work home from school, and I would try to do his work and keep up with him, so I always was competitive.
It was important. Studies, though, were important for us kids, and so there was always an emphasis on doing well in school. Even Glenn, I remember him working with me on spelling to make sure I would pass the spelling test, and he would grade me on that.
I can remember checking out, we had a test. I'd go find out from Lorna Grunn what she got in that. It was competition. I had to have the best score in our class of any of the kids. So that's some of the stuff that I did when I was really little. It was just really important.
That was important, to do well in school. And that was always emphasized by our parents. You know, even my dad, like I said, was an average student, but he knew the importance of schooling.
I was in the 1st grade. Miss Shirley was our teacher, and Miss Shirley passed out after being there a little time. She passed out books, a red book, a blue book, a yellow book, a green book. And I went to class and I was watching it, and she'd say, "Okay, would the red book class come up and let's read our book?" And in the first week I looked at that and I'm saying, those that have the red book, they get up there first and their book is a little harder. And I was in the second bunch. And I went up there and said, "I want to be in the class, the other class with the hardest book." And she said, "No, I mean, I got this sorted out. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing." And I want to be in the class with the thing. When all those kids, the book is harder, and I don't think you're ready. It was in the 1st grade, I pestered her that I wanted to be in that class. And she finally says, "All right, starting tomorrow, you can be in that class." I can tell you, I took that book home, and I memorized that whole book. I knew every word and every page. And the next day when she called me, "All right, Glenn, read the book," it was a snap. So I got in the top reading class, and I was able to stay there. I did the same thing when I was in the 3rd grade. I can remember that the same thing is that we were going to have spelling, and she would give us 20 words, and on Wednesday she'd give you the words. I'd get maybe 10 of them right. The other ones I wouldn't. You didn't have to hand it in. Didn't make any difference. But I can tell you, Thursday night, when I went home, I took those 20 words home, and I memorized every word from beginning to end. If she would have asked for them in a different order, I probably couldn't have done it, because I really memorized, 20 words, say they had 6 there, 120 in a row. She would say, "All right, let's take our test." I just write it all down. She didn't even have to say the words. I knew that, so my memory really served me really well in those classes to be the top students.
We would get 2 changes of clothes for school, and we'd wear one Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the other one we'd wear Thursday, Friday. It was the same shirt, same pair of jeans, and then we would get home from school, and then we'd change into the hand-me-downs that we got from our brothers and my older brothers, and then we would use those for doing chores around the farm. And then Saturdays was more chores, and Sunday we always had a Sunday clothes to wear and go into the little congregational First Congregational Church in Comfrey.
So there was this kid, and his folks had money. They were wealthy farmers. And we had a game called marbles. Marbles was you threw your marbles into a pot, and if yours got into there, you could select the other, take them out. And this kid came to school one day, and he had the most beautiful marbles. They were like cat eyes. And I thought, oh, I never saw marbles that were that pretty before. So we talked him into playing marbles with us. And every time, he'd put in a pretty one, I'd put in a dud, we called them. They weren't very pretty. They were all chipped marble. And we would put in there, that's about all we had. Well, eventually I won just about all of his marbles from him, which I thought was terrific. I was really excited, except that he went into the teacher and told the teacher that I had all of his marbles. And the teacher asked me if I did. I said I did. And she said, well, give them back. And I still can remember exactly standing there in that room. I won those fair and square. I'm not giving them back. And she says, you give them back. I wouldn't do it. I got sent out to the hall, which was punishment in those days. You had to get kicked out of the room, and you had to stand out outside the door. But I would not give back his marbles because I thought I had earned them fair and square. But every once in a while, I had little things that my competition probably took over.
Farming was truly a family effort for the Taylor family. I asked Glen what he remembered about crops and livestock on the farm, and Larry shared a story that showed Glen's early entrepreneurial spirit involving a lot of chickens.
We took over the farm that my grandpa had, and Grandpa came up from Iowa during the Depression, and they got the farm from a bank. And so my grandpa farmed it from the bank, and I know when we moved on and farmed it, it was a little bit of everything. So we had dairy cows, we had hogs, we had some sheep, we had a little bit of everything. And our fields looked the same way. We had corn, we got into soybeans, we had oats, and we had flax. So we had a little bit of everything.
Play and work was always shared together, all our activities. Baling, harvesting corn, silage, putting up the hay in the hay mound, everything. We always worked together as a family, sharing the work.
Basically what happened is the flax and the oats mostly got hauled to town and sold, and you got cash and stuff like this here. And that cash all went to the bank. It was all determined. The bank needed a payment, then you hauled your things. The corn, the soybeans got hauled to town for cash. The corn you kept on the farm to feed the animals. We didn't sell like a truckload because we didn't have that many, but I can remember we'd round up 3 pigs, put them in a trailer, haul them to town, get the money. Dad would take the money down to the bank and pay off something. Mom, on the other hand, she got the money for the eggs. So the eggs were ours. So you collected the eggs, you took them into there was a place called the hatchery. They bought the eggs from you. So every week you got the eggs, you washed the eggs, you put them in, took them in there, and she'd get her cash. They'd give her cash, and then she'd go, and from that she'd buy the spices, salt, sugar, and things like that.
There was the year we got a whole bunch of chickens and raised them to sell them, and the money was they were older, Roger and Glen, but they probably came up with the idea, we'll do that, and the money gets to buy a television. And I can remember when we got that. That was probably I think around 1954. And we could get maybe 2 stations, black and white. And, but that was the deal. We raised all those chickens, and then we had an assembly line. I can remember that distinctly. Everybody had a certain part of the process, from the beheading to the dunking in hot water, to plucking, to gutting, to packaging, and then we sold those chickens. And the money from that was used to buy that big console, cabinet type TV. So then we got to watch Vern Gagne and those other wrestlers from the 50s. That was something we used to watch. Jackie Gleason was another one we would always watch together as a family. And laying on the floor and chairs and seeing that.
Working for other farmers to make some extra money was part of life for Glen and his brothers. Glen shares what he remembers most about working for others when he was younger and the life lessons he took from those experiences.
When I was a kid, working for different people, it really made an impression on me with, that I worked with Leo Cullen, and he only had girls back then. And the same thing with Schmitz. They only had girls. So they asked us boys to come over and help them with catch pigs or projects that girls wouldn't normally do. And the part that I remember is how they treated us is the Schmitz, he had pop in bottles in a cooler. And it was just something we never had. You didn't have pop. We always had a jar, a ball jar, filled with not even lemonade, maybe nectar. We called it nectar. And you put a scoop of that in and it turned it red. And then you put ice cubes in there and stuff like that there. That was our idea of something. When you worked, you got a treat, you got a sandwich, and you got that. But I mean, the pop, the Cullens, Leo, I'd cultivate and do that, and they'd invite me up to the house. I mean, they were like, "Okay, Glenn, come up to the house, eat with us," and stuff like this there. And Agnes was her name, and she always was a good cook. And I think she did a little extra because I was there, helping. I remember that, and it's really made an impression that it doesn't take a lot of nice things that you do for somebody, and people really appreciate it. And I think that has really stuck with me. What you do doesn't have to be big. It's just the recognition of that you appreciate their hard work, that they stayed a little extra, or they did that. My older brother, Roger, he farmed himself out to a guy that had a bunch of cows, dairy cows. So he lived in the kind of the attic of their home, and he helped do the chores and did things like that. I farmed myself out to a neighbor, and he had beef cattle, and I had to do whatever you had to do. He was not a very nice person. He was, and it taught me some things that my employees have heard a lot of times. He mistreated me. I'd work certain hours and I wouldn't get paid for it. And he would ask me to do this and that. And at that time, I probably said I hated him, but I needed the money. It was $1 an hour. I needed the money. Sometimes I worked with a family member, neighbors and stuff like that. And I worked with them, and it was always fun. They gave you lunch. And that was really high priority to have lunch so you could eat. But this fellow was a bachelor. And I think because he was a bachelor, he didn't understand kids. And he didn't treat me fairly. But I just always have said, and I reminded today, I know how you don't treat employees. And it was like, boy, did I learn that from him. He abused employees. And I said, I'm never going to do that, because I knew how much I disliked him. And I figured, well, that's how people would feel about me if I did that. So that was my learning lesson in how to treat people, and I've tried to work really hard to be respectful to others.
Innovation has always been a part of Glen's life, and the ability to fix machinery or make enhancements to equipment started on the farm, working with his dad and his brothers.
We didn't have money to buy and fix machinery. So when we were out farming and something broke, it never occurred to us that we'd jump in the car and go to town and get a part. We had to figure out how to make something out of our, what we called the junk pile, and weld it, or bend it, or do whatever we needed to do to make it work. Later on, when I was getting the company going for Mr. Carlson, and I started to change our equipment, that came in really handy, the knowledge to take equipment without spending money and to modify it so that it would print and do things like that.
Well, yeah, on a farm, you got to make do a lot of times, and it's it was a small farm. We had very little money, very little cash, and so if something broke, you had to figure out how to fix it, mend it, repair it, whatever. And so we had a shop, and you just went in there. You just couldn't afford to buy new like people do today. You didn't throw anything away. You reworked it. Nowadays, something breaks, just go buy a new one. No, you fix it. You always had to fix it. You made do, especially when you don't have the cash to buy stuff. You had to make do with it, and we would come up with ways to get it done out there on the farm. It was just no other choice. how you say it's, we just had to make do and reuse materials, reuse wood. We had our piles of lumber that we could pull things out of, do patching and repair. And that's just the way you did things. And there'd be a gravel pit not too far from there, and we would drive up there and take our tractor with a scoop on it and load up and haul it back, and we spread it on the driveway to fill in holes and do things. You just made do on a situation like that. When I say the same thing applied to our clothes. My mother did lots of patching of clothes. And there was a promotion by Purina Feeds at the time. They sacked food in bags, cloth bags, that were a soft material that had designs on it. And the women could take those and make dresses out of it. And she did that. She made quilts. And that's how you got by. You just made do with things like that.
Glen has always loved animals, and especially birds. Larry told me to ask him about how he may have got carried away by his eagerness to check on pigeon nests in the barn.
So another part of the farm life that I really loved was the animals. So when they gave birth, whatever animal was, I stayed out that night with the mother while they gave birth. And the important thing was to make sure that each one, each little piglet was born, would live, and nothing bad would happen to it. But I can still just remember that laying out there, sitting out there, in that the dog would be there, about 2 or 3 cats would be there, and you'd just be sitting there petting them and talking to them. Always had a radio, listen to basketball games if we could. But that was another part that I really enjoyed as a kid. The other thing that I did when I was a kid is I loved it, and I was just really interested that I would walk fence rows, and I would watch for pheasants to get up and things like that, birds like that. And then I'd go find their nests. And on our farm, I knew where every nest was for the blackbirds, for the doves, for the pheasants, for that. Normally in the barn, the pigeons would make their nests way up in the top. And how in the heck were you going to get down there? But a pigeon made its nest, you had a big door, a rolling door, and hogs or whatever could come into the barn, and you could push the rolling door back. So it was pretty wide. Maybe the door was from there to here. And a pigeon made its nest over there. This was a school day. I had on my school clothes, and we were ahead of schedule on the bus, and I decided I wanted to go down there and see if those eggs had hatched. So you go to the place, and you jump up and you grab like this here, and then it was a so you're hanging over there. But you're over the pig poop and stuff is down there, you know, stuff like this here. So I worked my way out there. I don't know what happened, but whatever happened, the board slipped or something slipped, and I had to grab with this hand right away because I was going to go in the poop and whatever. And I grabbed, and it was right on the nail, a nail. It's just right. It was right there. It's right there. I can show you the scar because now you're hanging, but you're really hanging from a nail falling through your goddamn fingers, and you got to get it figured out as fast as you can. Well, eventually I got it off and just jumped down. You know, you had to do that, but yeah, he's right.
Did you make it to the nest?
Huh?
Did you make it to
Not that day, not that day I didn't. But those are the, but we did a lot of those things. We climbed up on top of the barn, went onto the barn. We had a thing for the hay that you put the slings on, pulled it up, grabbed it, and that big board was out there. So you know what I'm talking about, okay. So out there, and then we'd lay on the top roof, reach over, take a sack, and stuff it around then, go to the other end, stuff everything we could get up there, go to the top of the barn, stuff so the pigeons couldn't get out. Now you go in there and throw stuff at them, and eventually they land someplace that's lower so you can get them, and sometimes, you know, stuff like this here. But we did all that stuff, but we never told our mom or my dad all that crap that we did like that. You know? I mean, there's, you dad, what? What if you would have fell off? But we didn't fall. What else you have to know? We didn't fall.